Hi, we are very excited to be joined today by S.A. Barnes to talk all things space horror with your newest book, Cold Eternity. Hello, how is it going?
Hello, thank you for having me. This is so much fun.
We were just saying off camera, this is super early for you. So we're gonna, yeah, we'll
It
start
it
out.
is so please have pity on me. As if I drift off and stare into space somewhere, it's because half of my brain is still tucked into bed.
Understandable, understandable. We've also got that Friday feeling as well. Not only is it early, but we're heading into the weekend. So, yes.
You know what? That's actually why I was like, okay, I can do this early one day as long as
Yes.
the next day I don't have to go to work. So
Yeah.
I was like, all
Yes.
right, this can be done. We just got to do it the right way.
That's what I love to hear. Friday's perfect. And we also just saying off camera, obviously your newest book, which we're going to get into, is the first book that is available via Penguin in the UK. So anyone watching from the UK, they can go grab a copy in stores now, which is very exciting. So what can you tell us about Cold Eternity?
Cold Eternity, I've written now a number of books over a variety of pen names and years, and Cold Eternity was one of those ones where I just had so much fun exploring that world and figuring things out. If you've read the book, I think people who are familiar with US politics are going to be like, whoa, because I seem like I predicted the future. I did not. I was actually writing about the past, but whatever. It is about a young woman named Halley. She witnesses something at her job that she has a job that's in politics, and something that shouldn't have happened. And she basically is on the run. And when people, the bad guys, which I'm, being deliberately obtuse here, is like when they find her, she decides she needs to kind of basically find a better hiding spot, and she chooses the Elysian Fields, which is sort of a relic of an old, like a previous time when there was a man who thought that he could, a billionaire, a trillionaire actually, who thought he could stop death. So he offered it to people who would basically buy a spot on this ship. And if you were dying of something, they would preserve your body, and we would wake up, and you could be healed once technology had advanced enough. But as we know, technology doesn't always go the way we think. I thought I would have a flying car. I do not have a flying car. It's probably better for all of us that I don't. And so now 150 years later, it's just kind of this barge of rich people that is sort of floating out there in the solar system making rounds because there's enough money to keep it going, based on a trust that was established. But you can't do anything. You can't fix them. You can't wake them up. You can't save them. So Hallie, knowing about this, kind of gets a job as a caretaker on board. Under kind of like it's not legit, like it's she's hiding, so nobody really knows she's there. She's supposed to be one of the only living people on board, living and awake. Carl, the engineer, is the other one. But as soon as she's there, it's a very isolating position, lots of dead people in cryo tanks, and it starts to feel like maybe she's not the only other living thing on there, that maybe she and Carl aren't alone, and that maybe something else is going on. But then she's also not sure how much of that is lack of sleep and isolation. So it's kind of like, am I going crazy, or is there something weird here? And it was just a whole bunch of fun to write. It really was.
That definitely comes across. I was going to say a thing about horror and the horror I particularly enjoy is there's glimmers of humor there. There's glimmers of kind
Yes.
of lightness in amongst all the scary stuff. So yeah, that
Yes.
definitely that definitely comes across. So
Good. I'm so glad. Yeah. When you're joyful, and I think also just you need that when you're writing horror. I feel like you need that lift of humor, or kind of that release, because then if you are constantly scared, eventually you start to get numb to it. Ask
yes.
me how I know. Um Sorry, another political reference.
I know.
Um so if you so when you have those little glimpses of humor, when you have a break, then that sort of helps you, then, oh, now I can get back into this, I can build that tension again. So I try to do that, and that book just had a lot. It was just fun.
So we're going to first touch on kind of some of the naming conventions, which I found quite interesting. Obviously, with Elysian Fields, you had
Mhm.
was it the Brazilian in your one of your previous books?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Where do the naming conventions come from? Because it kind of, again, that almost that glimmer of hope kind of thing, especially with Elysian Fields, you have obviously the rich in society kind of wanting to potentially live forever. Yeah, where does that kind of idea come from?
So a lot of the naming things, I don't look. If you ask me why characters are named certain things, most of the time I don't have a great answer other than just that's the name that is in my head. They sounded like, but the ships I do try to be deliberate because I think it's not my particular subtle way, but it's a sort of a kind of always on theme. So the Elysian Fields, obviously a representation of the afterlife. Um, a form of heaven essentially. I think it's Roman, and there's a little bit of tongue in cheek in there because what kind of afterlife is floating in a ship in a cryo tank, but also without being too spoilery, I mean, all things must come to an end. So what does that look like? The resilient, because I feel like that was sort of the theme of that main character and needing to be resilient and not always able to, maybe not always in the right direction. In the first book, that it'll be the second book, in the UK, Dead Silence, I named the transport, the ship itself is called the Lina, but the transport that's coming to get them is the Ginsburg. And I wanted to do that. That was actually before our Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, our former Supreme Court Justice, passed away. And I thought, we have all these ships, and whenever you're in, space, horror or sci-fi, it's always like, the Jefferson or the, whatever. I'm like, why are we not, I want to name, we call all ships she. Like, why are we not
Mm.
naming them after famous women who've had a role? So I was very proud of my Ginsburg there. Also, again, because it's, in that particular book, you have a lead female character who's doing things that maybe a lot of people don't like.
Yeah, so some very interesting links, I think, with your main characters, because I suppose no one is 100%, good or bad. There's always
No,
that kind of that gray in between. How do you kind of where does that kind of the character start for you? Kind of do they come in fully formed? Is it a character that with your books that kind of changes as you write?
that's a great question. It sort of depends on the book. With Cold Eternity, what I liked is, I guess, what really starts with me is I have to kind of have an idea of the situation. Um, in that case, a lot of times when I'm writing something, I'm sort of mulling over something that I struggle with or something that I think about. And in that case, it's in Halley's case, it's about, the way that I always think about this, I was telling my dad's a pastor.
Yeah.
And so we had a lot of philosophical and religious debates when I was a kid, still do. And, like when you're in traffic here, do you let the person out of the driveway, out of the restaurant, even though that means you're making everybody behind you later? Or do you, like, where are your ethics? Where's your lesser of two evils? What are you doing? And then how do you have the courage to do that? And I am frequently guilty of, like, just stay quiet, and just go because it's easier. And Halley runs into that. And where's your line, right? So thinking about that and thinking about the type of person, and then trying to figure out what situation would actually force them to make a decision and grow and learn. Because that's what I'm actually interested in when I'm starting all of these stories, is looking at a flawed person who will continue to be flawed even past and beyond the end of the book, but and how do we get them to recognize, oh, this particular area in me is needs to change, this is causing pain, and I need to learn and grow and be better in some way. So that's what I'm actually looking at, when I'm coming up with a character. Sometimes it refines, but that central core idea of who they are and what they're working on pretty much stays the same.
Mm. I suppose there's the element of kind of trying to run away from situations, but inevitably there's
Yes,
only so far you can run.
this is true, and I am frequently reminded that a lot of times if you avoid a certain kind of challenge, like say trying to keep things calm instead of speaking up, then that is going to be visited upon you again until you get it. I
Yes.
feel like that's true about life too, not just
Yes.
in books, but like you're going to keep running into that same challenge until like the lesson is finally pounded into your head and you're like, all right, fine, I will figure this out.
So I think one of the biggest kind of draws of I think actually all three of your horror books is space is scary. There's nothing like the idea of you can't actually escape very easily.
Right.
You're kind of trapped in very kind of claustrophobic space, literally and metaphorically. So how did kind of the space theme, is it something that you're kind of conscious of coming up in all your horror works? Is it something that you find kind of particularly scary to write about and imagine?
I would never go to space.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely terrifying, even without all the random things that I throw in there. But just space in general, does not care about you and probably would as soon kill you as anything. We know that. I mean, that's just the
Mhm.
way that it is. Intrigued about with space is the idea that it already adds like a base level of tension in the sense that if you're being chased by a serial killer in a small town, in a city, wherever, you can run. You may not get away, but you can
Mhm.
run. But to your point earlier, there's a very limited amount of space on a ship where you can run, and you can't
Yeah.
really hide very well either. So it automatically ups whatever's going on. It automatically ups that tension, and I love it for that reason. But I also think that you don't really see who someone is until you back them into a corner. And
Mhm.
space really helps you do that because there's rarely somebody else around who can help you. It's easy to knock out communications. I mean, it just gives you all these opportunities. Plus, I feel like the deep ocean in some ways. One of the most frightening things is the unknown. So
Mm.
it's not just that something is happening to us that's scary, it's that we've never encountered this before. No one has encountered this before. So now what do we do? And I feel like that opportunity allows you to really push characters past their limits. In terms of just me, I've always been a sci-fi person. So grew up watching Star Trek and Star Wars and all of that stuff. And one of my favorite movies is Event Horizon, which probably makes its way into everything that I write. Um, I'm heavily influenced by that.
And there is something, I think as well, kind of a lot of just thinking about some of the 80s, 90s kind of horror
Mhm.
films and stuff that really made a huge kind of impact. I mean, obviously the Alien franchise,
Yes,
like,
100%.
oh my God, incredible. Is that something that you're aware of kind of creeping in? And it's not a bad thing because they're fantastic.
I tend to so whenever I'm sitting down, one of the joys and of being able to have the freedom because I used to write full time for a living, and one of the harder parts of that is you're always trying to figure out what's going to sell, who's going to buy this, how am I going to be able to pay my mortgage this month. I have another job, so one of the joys of that is I can go, what interests me, what story like kind of speaks to my psyche, and yes, let's do it. And Aliens, the second in that
Mhm.
series, is one of my absolute favorites. In fact, in Dead Silence, which will come out, I think, in April
Mhm.
for the UK, there's a scene right at the beginning which is heavily influenced by Ripley trying to explain to the company, and they're not believing her, and it's like just believe her. And
Mhm.
so I definitely think that in that case was definitely deliberate. I looked at that and thought I want to do this same sort of idea with um, in fact, there was conversation when I was talking to writing friends, like, why don't you just tell the story? Why does it have to be in pieces? Why does it have to be a flashback? I'm like, because the not believing her part is important, and you can't have that if you don't do it that way. So I definitely think Aliens, I mean, all of those things, sort of teaching us how space works, whether that's actually the way it really works, probably not. But I love it, that stuff is definitely an influence. And when I sit down to write, I want to write what I want to read, And I'm luckily in the privileged position to be able to say, I'm only going to work on the stories that I want to tell. So a lot of that stuff that kind of, lingers in my head for years, after watching it, it's like, ooh, wouldn't it be fun to have a story that's like this, but different? I mean, yeah, if Cold Eternity is me processing political uncertainty and strife, then Dead Silence is my question of where are all the psychics in sci-fi? Where did all the ghosts go? Why do we never talk about ghosts or hauntings in science fiction? So I'm kind of like exploring ideas like that as I'm writing.
It's almost bringing in a kind of supernatural element in a way, isn't it? Kind of that the
Mm-hmm.
stuff unseen, as it were, as
Yes.
well. So yeah, there's
Yes.
definitely a lot of tension.
Yes, yeah, yes, well, and I'm the way that and this is, I don't think a spoiler in any way. There's usually something supernatural or alien or something going on in all these stories, but also people are almost always the worst. People, there's almost always a human element. Going back to Aliens, to me, the antagonist in Aliens, the second movie, is not necessarily just the alien. It's the xenomorph. It's Paul Reiser's character. It's Burke.
Mhm.
And I feel like that is a fun like juxtaposition. Like, who are we actually afraid of, and who's really the bad guy there?
And I think as well in the Alien universe, so we had an event the other evening with Christopher Golden and Tim
Mm-hmm.
Levin. Chris was over from the States, which is obviously it's always fantastic when you guys get to come over.
Yes.
But we couldn't help but kind of chat about Alien and all the lore, all the kind of unresolved issues and
Mm-hmm.
storylines and stuff that kind of between the films, kind of pre-film and stuff. There's so much I don't know, human behavior,
Yes.
guilt, greed, all kinds of things kind of creeping into that one.
There's definitely a kind of a that's what I love about horror, is that there's this idea. I think it comes from Save the Cat, which is originally Blake Snyder, but other people have taken it and made different. And the idea of there's a sin, right? That this is that people are that there's a sin involved without the religious aspect, but just a something that goes against, and I think so often it's greed, it's human greed, at least in my stories. And I am fascinated by that because it's a way to incorporate that idea without being finger waggy, right? Like, I
Yeah.
can say, we can look at this. And the cool thing about combining sci-fi and horror, is that you can talk about what's going on in our world without seeming like you're lecturing. The same way
Mm.
that Star Trek did it back in the day with the original series, you can talk about social issues, but hopefully you have a way of getting into people's thoughts without, you know, seeming so direct. Like, it may provide an opening to talk about things or think about things in a different way.
Have you as well, have you kind of kept up to date with kind of have you been watching Alien Earth and kind of the newer things in that universe and kind of what do you think about the direction, I suppose it's kind of going in?
I have watched the first one, the first episode. I have
Yeah.
not. I've watched every all the movies, and then I watched the first episode, and I, my free time is unfortunately rather limited, and so I have not gone back to it yet. I've heard wonderful things. It's a little harder for me because, to me, the interesting part of it, and again, this is speaking from only one
Mm.
episode, having watched it, is what I loved about it is the idea of being isolated and being forced to make those decisions, on your own. Ripley is frequently on her own, or even opposed by
Mm.
any number of people. Where she and I'm not getting that sense from the show. But again, maybe this is before we start jumping in and doing things. I also like things set in space, and it's not really yet. So, but I mean, every story, they're kind of exploring the before, right?
Mm.
So you got to give them room to do that.
Yes, yeah. And I suppose it's always going to be very difficult to write in such a big kind of sandbox of there
Right.
is so many possibilities and things that could be done. So yeah, how do you kind of rein in those ideas almost and
Well,
not
and where do you go? Like you could do in a way there's like too many restrictions and also not enough. So you can
mm,
there are certain things you can do, but it's a very interesting combination of restrictions and freedom. And how would you balance that? I did enjoy the idea that we're going to be, the idea that you're going to be able to put a consciousness in another body. That's interesting to me.
yes.
Um, I mean, that's something that I have been fascinated with, if the technology goes that way. So there are definitely things that I think, I'm not quite sure how all that connects yet, but yeah, so there are definitely parts of that that I'm intrigued by, even if they're not in the original. Well, I mean, they are because they had the synthetics. So yeah,
Mm.
very cool. We'll see. I have to get back to it. I'll see when I can.
When you get some time.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly.
So another kind of interesting link again through all of your books is the idea that that kind of main protagonist is not, I suppose, the quintessential hero. And again, that's
Yeah.
something again I love kind of seeing in horror. Quite often it's not that it's not kind of the strongest, the toughest, the fastest person who's going to be the center of the action. It's kind of the yeah, the person who's kind of off center almost.
Hmm.
So yeah, is that again kind of something you're kind of conscious of doing? Are you kind of rooting for that underdog?
One of my favorite tropes is there's a problem that has to be solved, and the only person we have left to solve it is probably the last person you would pick. Like that's one of my favorite things. In Ghost Station, which is the second book out in the United States, but I think it'll be the last one out for the UK. Ophelia has no business being in that situation, has no business being in that job, but
Hmm.
we're all humans and we're trying, we're trying to make up for things or change things or do things. um Claire too in Dead Silence, and Halley, I love the idea of flawed characters have room for growth. um I love the idea of people picking up this book and being like, all right, let's see how she screws this up, because I think that's the interesting thing, right? If you have somebody who's a hero going in, there's less tension, there's less opportunity for them to fail and then try again and build and grow. But also, sorry, I'm also really intrigued by the idea that um, women's role in science fiction and in horror, and I want them to be the protagonist who has the room to grow. I do not want them to be the object of someone else or the instigating factor in someone else's growth, and I feel like that's what happens a lot. um we have a man who can't seem to get his life together or do whatever needs to be done until his wife, girlfriend, daughter is kidnapped or killed, and then it's like, oh, now I have to do this. I want women to be centered in their own stories, and to be the lead in this. So, and I want them to be messed up, because I feel like that's a privilege in a way that women have not been allotted in fiction. You even hear now a lot of conversations about unlikable female characters and how they're not allowed to be unlikable. And you know what? I mean, we're all degrees of unlikable in real life. I know I am. So I that really fascinates me. So to me, it's about that person being real, because when I sit down, I want to have the same expectation as a reader of, I have no idea how they're going to get out of this.
Hmm.
I don't know. And then when I'm writing, I'm figuring it out kind of as I go and watching them fail in real time. And that to me is interesting. If I knew from the beginning that they were capable of it, it's less fun, it's just not as much fun.
Yeah. I always kind of think either give me a character to love or give me a character to hate, but don't give me a character to meh kind of
Yes,
thing.
yes, that's a great way of thinking about it. I mean, you can certainly go the other way. I mean, I think about in romance, it's called competency porn, essentially, which is the idea that we like watching someone who's good at something do that. And there is
Yes.
that element in a lot of stories. I go the exact opposite direction, which is someone going, "Whoa, I am in way over my head and I don't know how to do this."
Yeah.
Um And I think there is both ways are intriguing, but I guess everybody kind of has a personal preference, and I just sort of go that way.
Mhm. No, fair. And I think, I suppose on paper, the job that she has at Elysian Fields, it sounds easy, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
You just got to do the rounds of the area. You press a button every few hours or whatever. It's almost 5 nights in space. That you just
Yeah.
got to
Yeah.
survive
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
that period of time. But I think obviously that's where the I suppose the fear kind of comes in, that kind of element of repetition. And it's something that, definitely builds kind of the dread, because when you start seeing stuff, hearing stuff as the character, you're just like, well, that's not normal, but maybe I didn't get enough sleep, or maybe I need something to eat, or yeah. So yeah, how do you build that tension? How do you kind of keep that going?
That was oh, as somebody, somebody with anxiety, I struggle with sleep. Sleep has always been a problem for me. It continues to be a problem for me. And so for Halley, I know that feeling of I'm so tired. Did that actually happen? Like,
Mm.
did that, that was so strange. Did I have that conversation? When you're tired and you're not with it, your brain suddenly becomes an unreliable narrator inside your head. And I think that that's sort of what I was going for. I don't have children, but I've had other people who've said this is very much like the newborn schedule of getting up and feeding a baby every couple hours, and your brain just starts to kind of fall apart because you don't know, that's how you end up putting coffee in the baby bottle instead of, whatever, because you're just trying to function. You're not built to function that way. And I think that part of that was the fun part of that, right? Because you're like, maybe there is something really going on there, and maybe there isn't. And I feel like also we as humans, when we're trying to figure something out, I tend to lean toward like, oh, benefit of the doubt, benefit of the doubt.
Mm.
So Halley
Mm.
was one that was really fun for me because unlike um Claire or Ophelia, who had both experienced really traumatic things in their early life, um, and sort of had an understanding of the supernatural, or that things could happen in a way that was horrific. Halley's just kind of like, this can't be, this is nuts. There's nothing weird going on here. It's just my brain. I'm just tired. That's not a bone. That's just, whatever. Like there's nothing crawling around the walls. It's just, Carl making noise, because she doesn't have that frame of reference. So in combination with that perspective, um, and then the lack of sleep, it was really fun because I imagined that readers like myself were yelling at her, going, "Wake up! This is a problem. You are in danger. Stop!" And that was fun because I feel like that almost in a way was audience participation. You're pulling the reader into that, trying to, because then they're not reading exactly to see what happens. They can see what's happening. They're reading to find out when she's going to realize what's
Mm.
actually going on, which is really fun.
Yeah, it is quite interesting. And I think that, again, it's something that's quite enjoyable about horror books and films. It's that whole, oh, rubbing the eyes up, I didn't see what I just saw. And it's
Yes.
like, oh no.
Yeah.
Please
it's very
believe.
it's very much that idea, and it's slightly in space basically, but that idea of, hi, I'm home alone and I heard a strange noise in the basement after hearing a story on the news about an escaped serial killer. Let me go check it out. And you're yelling at them, don't do it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But also I have been who's like, my husband and I were home alone and we heard this really loud like thump from the laundry room, which was behind the family room is here, the kitchen is here, the laundry room's back here. And so we're like looking at each other, and he's like, I'm not going. And I'm like, all right, fine, I'll go. So I even like do the cliche thing of getting the butcher knife out of the block in the kitchen on my way through. It was nothing. It was a laundry basket that had fallen off the dryer, with it was full, so it made a loud thud. Um, it showed me that you do stupid things like that. Now, granted, I had not heard of a serial killer in my area, so it wasn't probably as dangerous, but you can't ignore it. What are you supposed to do? Ignore it and then go to bed? And then if there is somebody in your house, you have just ignored it.
Yeah.
So it did show me that even though we yell at people in that situation, that if you can make it relatable enough, everyone understands because we've all done something dumb like that.
Yes, yeah. I think you like to think that you would be the one like running, to the escape pod or whatever, but chances are you would be, oh, what was that?
He doesn't, and that's one of the things that I had to, there have to be very good reasons for Halley to stay there, right? I
Mhm.
mean, things have to get really bad for her to want to leave, because leaving puts her in an even worse situation.
Mhm.
Um, and you have to set that up. That's the whole haunted house thing. Like, why would anyone go in and why would anyone stay? There has to be enough motivation, and the context surrounding the situation has to be bad enough that they're like, okay, how far can I stand this before I'm willing to go, ooh, I need out.
Yes. Now the setting kind of for Cold Eternity. So I suppose it's near future, but it's far enough in the future
Yes.
that you can be like, I can imagine that space travel is more of a everyday occurrence.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of something you kind of consciously do to kind of, I suppose, potentially if you set it too far in the future, then you have to start coming up with, say, more technologies and maybe
Yep.
actually get, doing the science, as it were, which
Yes.
gets quite scary.
Yes. I feel like that's kind of the sweet spot to tell stories, because um, I am most interested in people, and I don't want to go so far out that our experiences, that they're not as relatable. If we actually lived on a planet in another solar system and we would develop as our own culture, I mean, even we do that even generationally. I work in a high school, which is grades 9 through 12. And the words that Gen Z, that the younger kids use, like, what does that mean? And that's, we're all on the same planet talking about things. So you culture would become very different. And I'm not interested in that as much. I'm interested in, how are we going to change once we have just taken that like next step? What does that technology look like? How does that affect our lives? Um, and I think that I want it to be relatable. So I want it to be something that we can easily imagine versus, something that you would require a lot of explanation. I want you to be able to understand, this is a space microwave. This is a, this is a space phone. Like, I don't, because that, to me, that the technology is interesting in the way that it propels a story or shapes a story, but I don't want it to be the focus of the story. So by picking near future, things are similar enough that I could get away with focusing on that versus, how does this actually work and what did we do? And because I don't, that part I don't care about.
I suppose that there is a element. We've had a few authors on FPTV before where we've been talking about when things are set so far in the future, and you get to almost kind of make up like the Back to the Future thing with like hoverboards and stuff. You get to kind of make up
Yeah.
that science, but then whole, rabbit holes of, okay, how would that science work and what technologies would need to advance to kind of make that possible. It's yeah.
And I feel like, what, I feel like it's almost impossible to guess as well, because if you look back, I mean, I'm thinking of like when Disney in the 50s had Future World, I think, what they thought, some of those things were correct,
Hmm.
but some of them were way off because we just didn't know, and I feel like, we're still driving a car, which is pretty much still the same concept that it was when it came around. There's just been things that have, now there's a computer in the car, and nobody thought about computers. Nobody thought we'd be carrying them on us, even when
Hmm.
I was in high school, like that was not a thing. So I feel like trying to guess at the way that humans are going to advance is sort of hard. Um, but I am intrigued by, I mean, Star Trek certainly did that. And a lot of our technology that the engineers are working on are like, wouldn't it be cool if we could do that? I just don't have the brain for that. I don't think my brain goes, how can I take, what do I need to do? I need to have a phone call. All right, well, in the future, I mean, nobody wants to do a phone call now. So what are we going to do? And I mean, to me, it's kind of fun. Sometimes I think about it. I mean, we're sitting here talking. on Zoom, I can see you, you can see me. And that idea that within my lifetime, that is a new development, that that would never have happened. That's really cool. So I'm fascinated by technology. I'm not inclined to invent new stuff.
Yeah. Fair, fair. I think, but potentially it's quite nice to. I think with all three of your books, there's something you kind of you just get so swept away, and there's like we said before with the humor element, there's kind of almost a cozy element to
That's fair.
space horror,
Yeah.
which yeah, which is fun. It almost now, I don't know whether people find me weird when I say this, but like, my favorite horror is kind of the stuff where you almost get a hug and then you get like a smack in the face. Then you get scared.
No, I take that as a huge compliment, because that to me is kind of what I was looking to do. I wanted it to be fun, but on the edge of your seat. Like that idea of a cozy horror, of it being, familiar and we understand what's going on. But also, like, for example, one of my favorite horror movies is Happy Death Day. Have you seen that one? Do you know that one?
Yes. Oh
I
my,
mean,
yeah.
it's completely goofy, but I
Mhm.
love it. And it's shades of Groundhog Day. You know exactly what's going to happen and how this is going to progress. And it's right on the edge of your seat and you're worried. But there's also that sense of humor where she's like, come on, you're going to kill me. Let's do it already, because I got to start this loop back over again. I love that. And I think that that's kind of what I'm looking to do, is basically I just want to entertain myself. So if I could like step into these stories, that's what I'm trying to create. And I don't want, well, I want things to be scary and I want things to be uncertain. I also want my favorite things to be in there as well.
hmm And this is a nice kind of segue onto other influences. So kind of we've
Okay.
touched upon a few films and TV shows and stuff that have that you've enjoyed and have potentially kind of influenced your work. Is there kind of any others or any others maybe like underrated things that you would recommend that people go check out?
Well, there are definitely so space horror is one of those things that it was perceived as niche, however you want to say that. Um, and it still kind of is. But there are definitely, I have found there are books that I love. Um, Kelly Wallace has a great book called actually Dead Space, which is what this my Dead Silence was actually called Dead Space first. And it's kind of a murder mystery set in space, but there's also horror elements in it. And I love that idea of this just being the setting that we're in while all these other things are going on. I'm trying to think of other influences. I think a lot of it, I'm very influenced by the media that I've consumed. And I'm not sure that any of them are underrated, but Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a big deal for me, because of that sense of humor in there, while you also have horror. And I really think, and people are going to hate this, but I also think that um, when I'm looking at character growth and development, my experience writing both young adult and romance is a big factor, because those things, you can't really have those stories if you don't have those elements. So I think a lot of times I am looking at one of my pet peeves with horror, and this is nothing to say about anybody that enjoys this particular thing, is that I hate it when you have a main character who goes through all this trauma and finally pulls themselves up and makes a difference and makes a change and then is immediately killed. Like, what? No.
Mhm.
No. You need to get up, you need to grow, and then you need to go on and like experience what it's like to live in this new reality that you've created, where you have now put yourself into the situation where you've grown and become something new. And I think that comes from all of the um again, young adult and romance experience that I've had as a writer and a reader, because that's the purpose of it, is that you go forward in life with this lesson that you have learned, and the people that have changed you along the way. So I suspect, again, people don't want to necessarily think about it that way, but that I also feel like there's a lot of in sci-fi horror, to go kind of back to my little soapbox, where it's a female character who learns something, and the way that she applies that lesson, that growth, is to die in sacrifice of everyone else. It's like, come on, really, really? No, we're not doing that. And I'm fine. I mean, like, if that's what works for everybody, fine, but that's just not, I don't want to do that. So there are a lot of stories, where I looked at something and went, no, I don't want to do
Yeah.
that. Like, I want to
Mm.
take that. I love everything up to this point, and then no, I'm not going to name those things. Pandorum is an excellent movie that I don't think a lot of people have heard of. I think, is it Sunshine? Is that the one I'm thinking of, where the sun is making people crazy?
Yes. Yes. Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. And Solaris,
Mm.
which was an influence on a couple different things. I'm trying to think of other, in terms of incorporate, this is not unknown, obviously, but in terms of incorporating humor, I love the Murderbot series. So I feel like when I'm looking at space and horror, and then I'm thinking of things like that
Mm.
too, because I just, that's my comfort series to read. Like, I'm having a bad day, that's the series I'm going to go to.
Yes. Yeah, the Murderbot series is, yeah, so good.
It's
It's
perfection.
so
It's
good.
just, yes.
I like there's I suppose a thing with genre fiction in particular, and it's quite often people will be maybe scared of reading certain genres if they haven't before, or sometimes publishers are kind of almost scared of kind of publishing those genres.
Yep.
Sci-fi is one of those, but then you point to something like Murderbot and you're just like, you could do that.
You
You could read
absolutely
that.
can. And it's very interesting. When I my very first book that I ever wrote was sci-fi romance, and I remember having a lot of like readers say, I like romance, but I don't like sci-fi. And the sci-fi people
Mm,
didn't want the romance,
mm,
vice versa. Um, what I wanted to do, and my editor Kelly in the US, was very much like accessible horror. That's what we're looking for, accessible. So I wanted horror that would speak to the horror, the horror readers, but also would maybe bring sci-fi or other people in. Like,
mm,
I wanted it to be, that Venn diagram where it overlaps, because I do feel like there are ones that are perceived as having a higher entry point, a
mm.
difficult entry point, and I don't want to do that. Like, I want to tell a story that appeals to as many people as humanly possible without losing its core identity.
Mhm. Yes, yeah, definitely. It's I suppose it's a similar thing to as well when people say they don't read fantasy, but then you ask, did you watch Game of Thrones? Or
Yes,
have you watched The
yes.
Last of Us? Or, so there's I think it's nice to have those different kind of entry points, and there's kind of
Yeah,
something for
absolutely.
everyone in
And
there.
that's a great way to think about it too, because I'm actually one of those people who are like, you know, do you read fantasy? I'm like, ugh, no, because I don't like Lord of the Rings. To be fair, my husband is obsessed with Lord of the Rings, so I have, my feelings might be really more about his feelings about Lord of the Rings than Lord of the Rings itself. But on the other hand, but I love all kinds of different, and I did certainly watch Game of Thrones, and all of those things. So you're right, different entry points, different flavors in a way
Yeah.
is really, important, I think, because yeah, then we can sort of loop more people in. I really shouldn't make flat statements like I don't do blah blah blah, because there are any number of ways to prove me wrong.
So coming towards the end of the interview today, so our last two questions. So,
Mhm.
you're still based in Chicago, right? Or Chicago?
I'm in the people who live in the city would be very unhappy to hear me say
Oh,
that.
okay. Oh.
I live Illinois, which is where Chicago is. And I say that because whenever I look at, like, England or UK, I'm like, where is everything? Because I can't figure it out. Um, Illinois is where Chicago is, and then I am all the way up at the top, right by the border of Wisconsin. So I'm in the Chicago suburbs, technically.
Technically. Oh, that's quite, yeah, there's a lot of kind of city country divides in the UK. Yeah, I totally, some people will be like, I'm on the border, or this is like, they'll rather than name their suburb if it's a suburb that's kind of a bit, then they'll name the one neighboring. So they'll
Yes,
be like,
no,
oh.
people don't know the town where I live, so I'm like, oh, do you know Crystal Lake? Do you know that? And they're like, oh, okay, yeah. I'm like, okay, there you go, because you're
Yeah,
not going to
no.
know my tiny little farm
Yeah.
town. You're not going to know it. Sorry,
Fair.
I distracted you.
No, 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 no. I was gonna say, obviously there's quite a few kind of coming back to kind of different horror films and books and stuff kind of based in and around that area. And I know we had Paul Tremblay on a while back where we were talking about like Boston and how many things are kind of based in and around Boston, and it kind of, maybe deter some people from visiting, but may make others. I definitely have to go and see this for myself. But yeah, things like the Candyman, I think Child's Play, there's quite a few
Yes.
things. Do you think, and even obviously Crystal Lake, the name,
Yes. Yep.
do you think that kind of has played a part in even just, as you're kind of living there or growing up there, with your writing today?
So all over the place, but I have lived in Chicago, or in the Chicago area for the longest part of my life, or the biggest chunk of my life. What I love about being in this area, though, is that, anytime you have a city that is as kind of old and full of history as we get over here, which is not
Mhm.
nearly as old and full of history as you guys over there, which I hope one day to come and see all of that. And so we have very famous graveyards where, drive by and there's a woman in white who's trying to hitchhike, and if you pick her up and she gets in the back seat, she vanishes. I mean, so we have a lot of historied ghost stories, and horrible things, like the one of the first serial killers in the United States was H. Holmes, and that was Chicago.
Ah.
So his House of Horrors was related to the Chicago World's Fair.
Mhm.
So I think anytime you have that, you're operating at that level, like, I think Chicago has its own identity and its own way of being haunted and supernatural, and I love that for it. And Candyman, to me, that the most terrifying part of that is it's based on a real story, which I think is horrifying.
Yeah.
So and to me, I think being aware of all of that and knowing, um I know people who've gone on ghost tours, and you can go to cemetery tours of Chicago and stuff. And I just think it's fascinating. That's one of the reasons I do want to actually go to London, or to somewhere in the, because your history, you have so much more history even on top of like what we have. So
Mm.
that I think is fascinating, and having that to draw upon, to understand that there is that there, is always a good thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's, I mean, obviously, come to the UK. There is so much to see. But even, I suppose, even people like living here. Like I wasn't originally from London. I'm originally from Stratford upon Avon, so obviously Shakespeare country. So you get a
Yes.
whole other kind of element of
Yeah.
kind of Tudor spookiness. And then
Yes.
when I first moved to London, I did the Jack the Ripper tour, and it was
Oh
so much
yeah.
fun. And it was just
Yeah.
like, there's just so much to kind of
Well,
uncover.
it's just fascinating to me. I mean, the all of the history of it there. I have never been. So my secret desire, not so secret. I want to go. I want to see all the Jane Austen stuff. I want to go to the British Museum, and I want
Mhm.
to um somehow get a tour of one of the big country estate
Oh,
houses,
okay. Mhm.
like Chatsworth or one of those.
Yes.
So, because I feel like how fascinating that would be, just that level of history. And also, let's talk cursed objects. Let's talk, ghosts. Let's talk, in a way, one of the downsides of being a new country is we don't have that same level of history, where you're layers upon
Mhm.
layers upon. I was doing some research on curse tablets, which they dug up in Bath from when it was Roman,
Mm.
just all of that. I mean, I just think that's so fascinating. And I'm a kind of a history nerd, so I definitely, it's actually something my husband and I are talking about doing this spring, is coming to the UK. So we'll see if we can make that happen.
Oh my God. Yeah, so many amazing. Even if you come to our offices, there's a museum of surgery nearby, which
Ah,
some of the implements you're just like, I don't want to know where that went. I just
yes, exactly. They have, and I have never gone, but I think there's something here called the Mutter Museum, which is in Philadelphia, I think, and it's all kind of like things that did not go well,
Yeah.
like, body wise. So it's like
Yes.
skeletons, or fetuses that didn't develop properly, and it's like it's all these really interesting. Yeah, I love stuff like that. I would probably go to the surgery thing and be like, interesting.
It makes no.
Never know where inspiration is going to come from.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so for our last question today, so what are you currently reading, watching, and is there anything you're looking forward to before the end of the year or even coming out next year?
What am I reading? I just finished Exiles by, I think it's Mason Cole. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Coyle, maybe?
Yes. Yeah, yeah. I read his first book. That was so good.
I have not actually read, I think it's William. I haven't
Yes.
read that one. So I
Mm,
just finished that one. It was really interesting. That one was, I would consider that space horror or space
okay.
thriller, and that one was really interesting. I loved Matchmaking for Psychopaths, which was
Yes.
such an intriguing, like I picked it, I had never read that author before, had never heard of them, and I was like, I need something different. And I loved the creepy Valentine looking old school Valentine on
Mm,
the front. And that was amazing. I had the privilege to read, I think it's called, it's a long time, The Place Where They Buried Your Heart by Christina Henry, which comes out in
okay.
November. She
Mm,
and I are going to be doing an event, um, and in no at the beginning of November, like 1 or 2 days after the release, and that now that is a book that screams Chicago. I mean, it
okay.
is just, I felt like I knew those people when I read it. And, I'm trying to, I don't even know how to explain it to you, but if you read it, that is what it is. Like that,
Okay.
it's just like you're absorbed into this neighborhood where this creepy house is. But, the neighbors are watching the Cubs game and they'll bring over casseroles, when something happens or you're in a bad spot. And I'm like, oh, I know these people. I've not maybe lived in this exact neighborhood, but I have lived, and it was just so beautiful and heartbreaking and wonderful, and I just loved it. So that comes out on November 4th, and it's magnificent.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. And obviously she's published with Titan Books, who are our sister company, so we're in the same building, so I can run upstairs and grab a copy of it next time I'm in the
Yes,
office.
I highly recommend it. My other favorite thing that I have read recently, that came out last month, was Play Nice by Rachel Harrison. I will read anything that
Yes,
woman writes. I
yes.
highlight the crap out of it, which I don't normally do with
Mm.
my books, but I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Um, so yeah, those are some of my favorites recently.
Yeah, she has that kind of that New York kind of sass vibe just down perfectly. Yes. Yes.
I just love about everything that she has written. My favorite is Black Sheep, but I love all of them. Is that she takes your expectations, or takes even a trope or even a story you think is familiar, and then just like kind of cranks it hard to one side, and you're like, whoa, whoa, like what happened? You just drove us off the map. I did not know that this is what's going to happen, and I love that. So anything she writes, I automatically have on my list immediately.
Yeah, and understandable. She's amazing. She's another author that we need to get over to the UK. You all just need to come. Lots to see.
Yes, yes, lots to see, lots to do. Yeah, I'm actually, so I have, with Cold Eternity, and then I have Dead Silence coming out in April, and then I have a book coming out with, it's called Death's Daughter. It's Bramble, which is Tor. So it's
Yes.
contemporary romance, but in a dark academic, contemporary fantasy in a dark academia setting. And it's coming out in the UK also, at the same time.
Ooh, okay.
So, and that'll be in May. So I'm kind of thinking, like, if I come in June, I can bounce around and do some fun touristy things, but also do some book stuff too, which would be great.
A
So,
good shout. And we have Comic-Con at the end of May, so if you were to come over.
oh my goodness. Well, I would have to be invited to that, I think,
Yeah.
because as much as I love, like, it was really funny going to C2E2 here in Chicago. It's amazing. But I'm an introvert, so wandering even the exhibition floor, I'm like, oh, this is a lot of people. It's kind of scary. But I did find somebody in a Ripley costume and made her take a picture with me.
Cool. Okay. See.
Made her is a strong word. I said, can I please take a picture with you?
Yeah.
But it was just really cool.
I do, yeah, the cosplay really makes
Yeah.
those
That
conventions.
was
Yeah.
that was so fun to watch that. Just to sit there and watch people walk by in their cosplay was amazing.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and for obviously everyone tuning in at home. Cold Eternity is out now in the UK. We've got stock in our stores. Go pick it up, read it, and then your other books will be available very soon in the UK as well, which is very exciting, and
Yes.
other stuff as well. So,
Yes. Yeah.
yes,
Thank
perfect,
you so
brilliant.
much for having me.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so much.
for talking about the books. Appreciate it.
Yay, the perfect start to the day, hopefully.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.